The last UFC Fight Night card of 2023 goes down this weekend from the UFC Apex, and it's headlined by a bantamweight main event between two rising contenders in Song Yadong and Chris Gutierrez. This is Casual Roundhouse Fight Talk. You guys know the drill. We're going to preview this card from the very first fight to the main event. Rayanne Amanda versus Talita Alencar. Both these women are making their UFC debuts. Amanda is coming off of a Contender Series fight against Denise Gomes where she went the distance but ultimately lost the fight. Nonetheless, she's getting the opportunity against Alencar, who is undefeated but has an experience disadvantage in comparison to Amanda, which I think is going to favor Amanda in this matchup because most fighters in MMA who are undefeated early in their career and get matched up against somebody with an experience advantage usually end up taking that first loss early and learning that lesson. So Rayanne Amanda is the favorable pick for this opening bout. Tatsuro Taira versus Carlos Hernandez. This is an interesting one because in Taira's last outing, he was tested a bit against Edgar Chairez. He got caught with a couple of shots on the feet. Despite winning the decision, he used his grappling to dominate the second round along with a majority of the third round despite being caught in a late submission. There was a couple of penalties and fouls that kind of ruined the pacing of his last fight, but nonetheless, he still won and still dominated at times on the ground. And Hernandez's last bout against Dennis Bondar, he stuffed the takedowns and looked crisp on the feet with his hands, and I feel like it's going to be on Hernandez to have that same game plan against Taira, who was showing vulnerabilities on the feet when getting clipped by Chairez. So, in my opinion, Taira is going to have to implement a grapple-heavy approach for the path of least resistance in order to win this bout. And I think that's something he's more than capable of doing because he's shown that he's a dominant grappler in the past. So I will be favoring Tatsuro Taira. Luana Santos versus Stephanie Egger. Santos is coming off of that finish against Juliana Miller where she looked ultra aggressive and was essentially smelling blood in the water and took advantage. And Stephanie Egger is coming off of a loss to Irina Alexieva. For this, I'm going to have to favor Santos. Her finish was impressive, and she has the momentum in comparison to Egger. But usually fighters coming off of a loss to somebody who follows their win up against them with a loss, in this case talking about Irina Alexieva, those fighters, now in the case of Stephanie Egger, come into their next bout with something to prove, with a chip on their shoulder. But I still favor Luana Santos coming off of a TKO. We move on. Steve Garcia versus Melquizael Costa. So this fight is a rebooked fight, originally supposed to happen last week at the UFC Austin card. This, I believe, as I said in my previous video, this is a potential fight of the night. Garcia is on a 2-fight finish streak. TKOs, body shots. He broke down Chase Hooper along with Nuran Bekon. But in comparison to Costa, who dominated Austin Lingo on the feet in his last outing from a distance, as I stated earlier, this is a fun bout because Garcia is aggressive and doesn't mind scrapping on the feet, and Costa is a more than willing striker, as we have seen in his early UFC career. I'll have to favor Melquizael Costa. I think that he can play the distance game and win a decision, but he's going to have to be careful because Steve Garcia is dangerous. Hyungsung Park versus Shannon Ross. Shannon Ross is coming off of a rough knockout loss against Jesus Aguilar at UFC 290, and Hyungsung Park actually won the Road to UFC finals this past February, and I feel like that's going to favor him going into this matchup. I think considering both guys' most previous outings, you have to favor Hyungsung Park in this one. Featured prelim, Song Kenan versus Kevin Jousset. So both guys' most previous outings were relatively impressive. Song Kenan outpointed Rolando Bedoya to a decision in a relatively competitive slugfest, and Kevin Jousset made his UFC debut in his most previous fight, and that was against Kiefer Crosby. For as long as that fight lasted, it was a back-and-forth scrap. Jousset showed fearlessness in the pocket. He showed striking competence. He showed the ability to land shots in the pocket, but ultimately found a submission. And I think that despite his debut being short-lived, short time, he showed a lot. And I think Kevin Jousset is the safe pick in this bout, especially when you also take into consideration the fact that Song Kenan has also fought Israel Adesanya and I believe Brad Riddell in the past, both members of City Kickboxing, which is the gym that Kevin Jousset is currently training at. So they have a proper approach and read on Song Kenan's style as a gym, and it's going to be on Kenan to come in with something different, but nonetheless, I will still be favoring Kevin Jousset. We're on to the main card. Junyong Park versus Andre Muniz. So, Junyong Park is one of the most underrated middleweights in the UFC. He's fought Gregory Rodriguez. He's fought Eric Anders. He's fought all the guys that are like right on the outside of the rankings. And his only legitimate loss in the last year and a half is to Gregory Rodriguez, which was a war. Since then, he's been dominant. And I think that he is on a path to a middleweight ranking. And Andre Muniz, on the other hand, he's unfortunately coming off of that loss to Paul Craig, who made his middleweight debut against Muniz. And before the Paul Craig matchup, he fell victim to Brendan Allen, who is fast-tracking to a title shot. But nonetheless, I'll still have to favor Junyong Park. His last fight against Albert Duraev was very impressive. He hurt Duraev multiple times before finishing him, I believe with a submission, and he has multiple other submissions in the past, so he's not going to have any fear of the grappling that Muniz is going to bring. This is another fight to keep an eye out on, but I would favor Junyong Park. Tim Elliott versus Sumudaerji. So this fight was originally supposed to be Sumudaerji versus Alana Nascimento, and Nascimento had to withdraw. So we get Sumudaerji versus Tim Elliott, and Elliot gave Muhammad Mokaev everything to worry about and then some before getting caught in that arm triangle at UFC 294. Nonetheless, I feel like Tim Elliott has the perfect style to give Sumudaerji all the problems in the world, on the ground at least. Because on the feet, Sumudaerji is very rangy, and he's very good at using his range, as we saw in the Matt Schnell fight where he hurt Matt Schnell multiple times before Matt Schnell just walked through it and kept fighting on. But it's going to be on Tim Elliott to mix in the grappling and be tricky on the ground and always keep Sumudaerji guessing in order for him to win this fight and bounce back from what was an impressive showing against Muhammad Mokaev. Kind of a toss-up fight in my opinion. Sumudaerji had a long layoff because of the damage he took against Matt Schnell. I'll favor Tim Elliott in this fight. Nasrat Haqparast versus Jamie Mullarkey. So, Haqparast is coming off of an absolute war against Landon Quinones where his boxing looked crisp, his pressure was on point, he was constantly throwing hands in the pocket, showing comfort, rolling with shots, doing all the right things en route to a decision. And Mullarkey, coming off that win against John Makdessi, that fight was a bit more competitive than a lot of people felt it should have been. Nonetheless, I still think that Jamie Mullarkey is dangerous. He's capable of finding the mark, but based off what we saw in Nasrat's last fight, he looked to be in way better shape, much more conditioned, and despite that being a war, it was a war of attrition more so than a war of legitimate significant damage. So I'll have to favor Nasrat Haqparast in this fight. The co-main event, Anthony Smith versus Khalil Roundtree. Khalil Rountree's coming off of a vicious finish against Chris Daukaus. And Anthony Smith's coming off a fight against Ryan Spann where he was hurt quite a couple times. And there was moments where Spann could have finished him and just didn't. He took his foot off the gas, and that allowed Anthony Smith to essentially creep his way back in and edge out a decision. Unless Anthony Smith goes into this fight at peak condition, which is not necessarily possible considering Khalil Roundtree was originally supposed to fight Azamat Mirzakhanov, and I just feel like there's going to have to be a legitimate game plan based on Roundtree's style that Smith is going to have to exploit to a T in order to come away with this victory. I'll have to favor Khalil Roundtree Jr. nonetheless. He's just dangerous. He's explosive. And he's shown that time and time again. The main event, Song Yadong versus Chris Gutierrez. Both guys are coming off of wins. Song Yadong's win, I believe, most previously was against Ricky Simone, which was another 5-round fight. He stuffed all of Simone's takedowns, stayed safe on the feet, kept his distance, kept landing his shots, and he ultimately found the mark with a combination that got Simone out of there. It was a put your name on the map type of performance for Song Yadong. And honestly, it was sort of a win that a lot of people foreshadowed just because before that stoppage in the Corey Sandhagen fight from the cut, he was being very competitive with Sandhagen and making it difficult for Sandhagen to really get an edge, with that cut being the real difference maker. And Gutierrez's style is relatively similar to Corey Sandhagen's in the sense that he likes to keep at distance, poke at that lead leg with his kicks, throw the teep kicks to the body, and stay safe. That's not to say that Gutierrez doesn't have weapons that are capable of finishing the fight. We've seen him with the spinning back fists as well as the knees, but I think Song Yadong is going to be a lot more inclined to walk Gutierrez down consistently and find the mark with his hands. And he's proven to be a very good, very competent scrambler and wrestler. Obviously, at Alpha Male under Uriah Faber, they are scramble heavy, and I would favor Song Yadong in this matchup. I feel like there's a possibility we could see Song Yadong catch Gutierrez with something halfway through this main event. That was the preview for UFC Fight Night Gutierrez versus Song. I appreciate everybody watching. Let me know who you think is going to win the main event and some of these main card matchups. This has been Casual Roundhouse Fight Talk. I appreciate you watching as always, and we'll see you in the next one.